Hi everyone, my name is Karen, this is my channel RatherBeReading, and today I'm bringing to you a recent reads video. It has been a week since I last checked in for a recent reads video, and I have had a really good reading week, to say the least. I have completed 9 books, or 9 things, I guess, since I last checked in the past week, and I also DNF'd one further book on top of the 9 that I finished. So let's jump straight in so we can talk about these books as quickly as possible so we hopefully don't have an epically long video. So the first book that I completed over this past week was Embrace by Jessica Shervington. This is the first book in I think it's 6 books in the series. It's the first book. It's a YA a YA paranormal series, basically to do with angels. The main character finds out very early on in the novel that she is part of this kind of group of people who are part of like a guardian angel type of thing. And she finds out that she is one, you know, that old chestnut. To me, this was just okay. It was very tropey. To be fair, this is published in I think like 2010, so it's very like of its time. There is a very strong love triangle in this, which I think is going to play a role like a lot throughout the series, which is not my favorite thing. I enjoyed this enough, like it was just like okay. I also was a little bit disappointed because Jessica Shervington is an Australian author, and I was hoping that this was going to have like a cool like Australian setting, and I presume that it is supposed to be set in Australia, but where it's set is never stated. Like this could literally, you could read this and assume that it was set everywhere, like anywhere in the world. Like it could be New York, could be any kind of city. And so it's never expressly stated, which may have been done on purpose as a marketing thing, as sometimes I guess books published in Australia are not as popular in international markets, or may have been done intentionally, but as an Australian I was a little bit disappointed in that. So it's the first book in a series, like I mentioned. I do think I'll continue to at least book 2 and then see if that grabs me enough to continue, because obviously a 6-book series is a big investment, but like it was okay, and I'm hoping that it'll like kick up a notch even further like in the next book. So I ended up giving that 3 stars. I then completed Beloved by Toni Morrison. This is a historical fiction, like very literary novel. This obviously I believe won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction in '88, which is the year that I was born. I believe this was published in '87 originally. Yes, and obviously was an Oprah's Book Club pick. There is a movie which I haven't seen yet, movie adaptation, which also starred Oprah. This is a very hard to kind of describe what this is, because the synopsis on the back is kind of vague. So it's historical fiction. It is set in the mid 1800s, and we're following a character named Seth, female, I believe. I don't know if it's pronounced different to that. It's S-E-T-H-E. She is an ex-slave living with her teenage daughter. I think the daughter's supposed to be around 17 or 18 at the time of the novel, and about 10 years previously her mother-in-law passed away, and that's kind of had an effect on their lives. And then also around that same time her 2 sons went missing. They ran away basically. And then you also know that she had a child named Beloved who died like as a baby. I think it's around 2 Beloved was when Beloved died. And the house that they live in, Seth and her daughter, oh, now I'm having a mental blank on the daughter's name. Denver? Is it Denver? I want to say Denver. Can I find it? Yeah, Denver. Seth and her daughter Denver are living in this house that is basically haunted by the spirit of Beloved, this like dead child. And then there's I don't want to say what happens because it's not, you're not told on the back, but there's an event that happens that kind of then makes everything changes, and it kind of goes from there. I had very mixed feelings about this book. On the one hand, the writing at times could be incredibly beautiful, but at the same time it was really hard to read. Not just because this is very dark, very intense, huge trigger warnings in this for like violence and like just generally kind of very like dark themes. So it's hard to read in terms of that, but that doesn't bother me. I like dark themes in my books, but it was also just very dense writing. Like, this book is only 275 pages. It is not super long, but as you can see, like even here, for example, the text is really small and it's just huge chunks of writing at times with very little, like, here's another example with very little, like paragraph breaks and that type of thing. Like, it's just could be very dense. And then there's also, the author uses lots of time jumps, because you do get a lot of flashbacks back to when Seth was a slave and what happened and the story of her and her children and all of that. And so you get a lot of time jumps and a lot of perspective jumps because you kind of move between her, another character, which I kind of won't say what that is because it's kind of spoilery, I guess, because it's not on the back, the daughter, a man that comes into their lives at one point. Like, you get a lot of different perspectives, and it shifts kind of just, I don't want to say willy-nilly, but it shifts like without any warning. Like, there's no even like break in the paragraph. Sometimes you literally just kind of shift into a new perspective or a new time period without any warning, so it could get really hard to follow. This is a book that after I finished it, I actually went online and like read a full plot summary of this to make sure that I hadn't missed anything, and I hadn't, but I really had to concentrate and really like go back over parts of the book as I was reading to figure out exactly what was happening, which is not my favorite like reading experience. And having said that I struggled with the writing in terms of that, the writing, like I said, I think I said, could be incredibly beautiful at times. Like, I have written down a quote that I wanted to read to you that I personally found, like, the writing was really, like, deep at times. So I've got this quote written down that says, "Risky, thought Paul D, very risky. For a used-to-be slave woman to love anything that much was dangerous, especially if it was her children she had settled on to love. The best thing he knew was to love just a little bit. Everything just a little bit. So when they broke its back or shoved it in a crocus sack, well, maybe you'd have a little bit of love left over for the next one." Which is just so, like, such a powerful thing. Like, this book deals with such heavy topics about, like, you're dealing so much with a woman who, I mean, she's an ex-slave at the, like, in the current time, but grew up in slavery and still very much dealing with everything that happened because of that. And, you know, you're dealing with these women who had such fear for the lives that their children were going to lead, and at times really had to disconnect themselves from their children because they knew sometimes that they were going to be separated from their children when their children were very young and sold to other farms and other plantations and things like that to be slaves there. And just very, very harrowing. Like I said, the writing was very deep, very beautiful at times, but this was just a really, like, hard read and, like, several ways. So like I say, I was kind of torn about my feelings on this, and in the end I just gave it 3 stars. We then have my DNF that I did over this past week, which was Sing to Me of Dreams by Catherine Lynn Davis. This is one of the like backlist books that I had on my Kindle, and I think I mentioned when I talked about this in my TBR that I have no idea where I heard about this book or how it ended up on my Kindle, but I purchased it at some point, and it was a really long book. The ebook is over 600, like the actual book is over 600 pages. And so I actually only read like 7%, which sounds like not very much. And I guess it's not. I think it would be the equivalent of about like 45 pages that I read. But I just really, really wasn't enjoying it. And I had a couple of issues with it. So the book list, like the synopsis sets out that you're following a character who is half white and half Indian. And I believe that she's ends up traveling to England, and there's like, I think it's mainly a romance. But the issue that I had was I presumed that what they meant when they said half Indian was that they meant Indian as in the country of India. They don't. They mean an indigenous person, which I had issue with. And then on top of that, I was confused because a lot of the reviews refer to the person as Native American, but the book to me appeared to be set in Canada. So I don't believe that would be described as a Native American. Or maybe they would because it's North America specific. I don't know. Anyway, it's an indigenous person. But then the actual person, that the main character that you're following, her perspective and her part of the story doesn't start, like I checked on the like table of contents, until over a quarter of the way into the book. At the part that I was reading, you were following a completely different character, which I assume was going to end up being her mother, like you were getting her like history. But I was like, so I have to, because the book is over 600 pages, like, so what, I have to read like over 150 pages of a story to even get to the main character. Like that was just, I was just like, that's a big investment for a book that I already wasn't loving. And then the thing that put me over the edge that I was just like, no, I can't be bothered with this book, was that not the main character, but the character we were following at this point in the book was talking about how she didn't want to get married and she didn't want to have kids. Those were just not things that she was interested in, not things that she wanted from her life. And she was being told by another character, oh, that's just because you don't know the joy that like having children will like bring to your life, which I take issue with just generally, because some people don't want to have kids and that's fine. And I would have been okay with it if we were following more of a narrative of her overcoming that idea, but literally the next scene is that same night and the character that didn't want kids is at a campfire and she's like musing on the conversation and she's like, you know what, actually I do want kids. Just immediately like changed her opinion, and I was just like, okay, we're just gonna flip-flop on that like straight away. Okay, so I was just like, ugh, I can't be bothered with this story, so I DNF'd that one. The next book that I completed was Under the Harrow by Flynn Berry. This is a thriller novel. It is very short. Although this paperback is like a lot bigger and like wider, like so it's only 219 pages, but I guess if it was in like this format it might be more of a normal novel length. I don't know. But so I read this. This is a thriller that's about a woman is traveling on the train to visit her sister. Her and her sister have a very close relationship. Their mother died, I think, when they were very young, and their father was not a great father, has a lot of, I think, alcoholism issues. They're estranged from him, that they're not involved in his life, or he's not involved in their lives. And so the sisters are very close, and she's traveling from London to the area that her sister lives in to visit with her sister. When she gets off the train, her sister's not there to meet her, which is not necessarily unusual. And so she goes to her sister's house and discovers that her sister is murdered. Like, she finds her sister's murdered body. Also, with trigger warning, the sister's dog has also been killed. So just trigger warnings for that, because it's not super graphic, but you do kind of get mentions of what's happened to the dog as well. So just be aware of that. And then obviously this is mainly to do with the mystery of who murdered her sister. But to me, like, I enjoyed this, but to me you don't get a lot of mystery, because there's just not that many, like, it's not the type of novel where there are a lot of like suspects introduced. And then the ending, the way that it ended up kind of resolving, I was not a fan of. Having said that, the psychological aspects of this is very much a psychological thriller. I did really enjoy. You really follow the main character, Nora. You really follow her kind of descent into this real, like, her mental well-being is really starting to break down. She's become very obsessive about finding out what's happened to her sister in like to like an unhealthy amount. Like, it's the way she's responding is not like healthy, like psychologically. And you really follow her as she's really starting to unwind and go down this path of like obsession and really focusing on like particular persons at one point, like some points. And you know, that can be an issue if you don't know that they're actually like a guilty party, because you're really affecting their life, like things like that. So it was very interesting. Like I said, I didn't love like the overall outcome and all of that, but it wasn't like an enjoyable thriller. Like I said, there was some interesting kind of stuff going on in here that I enjoyed. I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. I then read The Opposite of Everyone by Jocelyn Jackson. Jocelyn Jackson is an author that I have been trying to read her entire back catalogue. And this one is so she writes kind of literary fiction, kind of with a bent towards women's fiction, I think some people would classify it as, but I would just call it literary fiction. And this one follows a main character named Paula, who had a very unconventional upbringing. It was just kind of her and her mother didn't raise her in like a conventional manner. They were kind of nomads, like hippie type people who didn't live in one spot. Her mother had constant boyfriends, and as soon as something would start to go wrong with the boyfriend, she would like run away in the middle of the night and they would literally leave. She wasn't in school most of the time. Her mother, like, you know, smoked a lot of pot, and you know, there was a lot of that kind of stuff going on, lots of different boyfriends, all of that. When the main character is about 12, I think it is, the mother ends up going to jail for a couple of years, and the main character goes into foster care. The mother does get out of jail, and she does end up like finishing out her last years of like before she becomes an adult with the mother, but the relationship after the mother goes to jail is very strange through circumstances that I won't go into because it's kind of spoilery. And then basically since she turned like 19 or whatever it was, 18 or 19 I think was what she says she was when she ended up leaving her mother and going to college, she hasn't had any relationship with her mother whatsoever since that time. And she is now a very successful, I think she's in like her late 30s or early 30s, like she's in her 30s I think, and she's a very successful divorce attorney. When she is, or what, every month she sends a check to her mother, and that's the only like relationship she's got with her mother. They don't talk. The mother never responds in any way. The mother just continues to cash the check. She sends her monthly check and it gets returned with this very cryptic message. And that is kind of where the story kind of jumps off from. I really enjoyed this book. I just really enjoyed Jocelyn Jackson's writing and her characters. Her books are very character focused and she really draws you into characters' lives really well, which she did in this book. I also really liked the side characters. I just really liked, you also have it's not a big part of the story, but the main character is mixed race, but of like unidentified origin. Her mother was white, but she's never known who her father is. She literally has no clue like who her father was and has no way to find out who her father was. So doesn't know her heritage, but just knows like that she's mixed in some way. And her mother's parents her mother's parents have issue with her because of that, because like there's a whole thing in the story that her mother wanted to name her Callie J, because there's a lot of to do with her, I should mention, like Hindu mythology. The mother tells a lot of Hindu based stories to the character like as she's growing up, and that's like a big part of the story. But yeah, the mother wanted to call her Callie J, this like kind of Hindu name, and but at the time that the mother gave birth to her, she was in a juvenile detention facility, and the grandparents took custody of her for like still when she was very young, but they purposely like misheard the name and called her Paula instead of Callie J. And so, you know, there's that whole thing as well, that, you know, a bit of racism towards her and things like that. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say about this story without like giving too much of away. It's like very like character focused. Like I said, I did really enjoy the characters. There's a lot of good character development. The main character herself is like not necessarily the most likable of people. She's become very like closed off and is very much like a ball breaker and is very work focused and all of that type of thing. But I guess it's got a lot to like focus in the story on how our upbringing and our childhoods kind of inform who we become as adults and that type of thing. There's a lot of good character growth and stuff like that. Anyway, I feel like I've been rambling on. I ended up giving that 3.75 stars. I did really enjoy it. I then read Giant Days Volume 9. This is the next volume that I needed to get to. This is, in case you don't know, is a graphic novel series that follows basically 3 characters, Esther, Daisy, and Susan, who are at the start of the novel, they're entering their first year of university in the UK, and you just basically follow their lives in university. I love this graphic novel series. I love the 3 characters. And this one wasn't my favorite, but I did still really enjoy it. Like, not too much to say. Like I said, we're 9 volumes in at this point, but I did enjoy it. It just wasn't my favorite. I gave it 3.5 stars. I then read The Martian by Andy Weir. This is a adult sci-fi novel. I'm sure you all know what this is about a character named Mark Watney who at the start of the novel has been stranded on Mars, and it's basically his survival story of trying to survive on Mars. This is pretty hyped, and I did really enjoy it. It's very science focused, because obviously the way that he is what he's having to do to survive is very based in science, figuring out how he's going to have enough water and enough crops and how he's going to grow crops, and everything he has to solve is like a lot of engineering, a lot of like stuff like that he's got to do in order to survive. And I was worried about that going into this because I'm not a science person, but I was able to just kind of not skim because I read it, but I was able to just like accept what he was saying. It's just like, yep, okay, and just like move on and just kind of accept it and glaze over it pretty much like I did in high school. So it wasn't an issue for me. The main character, like I've heard, is very funny. The story is very like comedic, which I like because it could be like, it is a very like kind of harrowing story. So I really like the comedic tone for the most part. I think this has a really good message in it, kind of about humanity generally. And I did really enjoy it. I really want to watch the movie now and see if the movie lives up to the book, but I end up giving this 4 stars. I then read Sleep by C.L. Taylor. This is a book that I was approved for on NetGalley. So I did receive a digital copy free in exchange for an honest review. So this is a thriller. It follows a woman who was recently in a road accident. So she was on a work trip on a team building thing, and she was driving the car with 3 of her colleagues in the car when they were in a terrible road accident. 2 of the passengers died, 1 is paralyzed, and she's kind of the only one that's walked away kind of unscathed, quote unquote. She's got a lot of guilt surrounding that, and there's a lot of issues kind of around that. And as a result of that, she's feeling very a lot of guilt, like I said, and then there's this kind of weird things going on of she's getting some weird kind of messages and feels like maybe she's being followed. And so she decides to relocate to this extremely remote Scottish island to be employed at a hotel on this island. So she relocates there, and there are 6 guests or 7 guests staying at the hotel, and there's this huge storm which cuts them off from, not even just from the mainland, but from the other half of the island. The area where the hotel itself is completely cut off, and there's a lot of issues going on with that. And then there's some more creepy stalkery things type going on. That's the main gist of the story. I really enjoyed this for the most part. It very much does give me vibes of An Unwanted Guest by Shari LaPena. It does have a very similar kind of plot. I will say that Shari LaPena's book is more, not slasher, but it's more people are being murdered and people are dying off, whereas this one's more of a stalkery element, which I personally prefer the more people slowly being murdered off type of thing, but I did still really enjoy it. The setting, I also really love, this setting on this, I love a closed-in story, and this was definitely that, but it also had that really creepy atmosphere because you're on this Scottish island and there's this huge storm going on and it's wet and cold and windy and blustery, and then there's guests and we don't know who's, everything about these guests and who they say they are. Is that right? You know what I mean. There was a kind of twist at one point that I didn't see coming, which I really enjoyed. And yeah, for the most part, I really enjoyed this. It wasn't my favorite thriller ever, but it was a very strong thriller. I ended up giving it a very strong 4-star rating. Next, I completed Sadie by Courtney Summers. I finally read this book. I listened to it on audio. It is narrated by Rebecca Sola, Fred Berman, Dan Bittner, and Gabra Zachman. They're the 4 names that come up, but it is a full cast. There could be other people involved in it that are just not listed or that I couldn't find. The audiobook was amazing. So this story it's a YA thriller, and it's basically about a girl named Sadie whose 13-year-old sister Maddie was murdered, and Sadie has since gone missing, but we know that Sadie, because we're reading it half from Sadie's perspective, we know that Sadie has gone run away, and she's basically on this kind of revenge journey to get revenge for what's happened to her sister, basically. But you're following half in her perspective, and then you're also following half of this guy who has basically got this podcast of trying to track down Sadie and trying to figure out, follow Sadie and figure out what happened to her, and then kind of also obviously delving into what happened to Maddie, as the 2 stories are linked. This is very dark. Trigger warnings in this for pedophilia, sexual abuse, substance abuse, just generally for any kind of dark theme you've got going on in this. Obviously, for me, right up my alley because I love dark themes in my books. I will say that this is not really a mystery. This is not the type of story where you're trying to figure out who done it. So if that's what you're looking for, this is not the book for you. If you're also looking for a really nice wrapped up ending where all of your questions are answered, this is definitely not the book for you. And I personally am not someone who needs that from my endings, but I still was left very unsure about how I felt about this book after the ending. But the more I sat with it and thought about it, the more I realized how much I know I really, really did enjoy it, and I really enjoyed kind of what the ending represented in some ways and all of that. I think this novel is a lot about love, which sounds really strange for a book that is so dark, but you get so much about Sadie's love for her sister. They had a terrible upbringing. They've got different fathers, but neither of their fathers were involved in their lives. Their mother was an alcoholic and a drug addict. Sadie basically raised Maddie, and she has been left completely devastated by her sister's death, and you get a lot of like that, and it's a lot to do with just the undying love that she had for her sister, and ultimately the dark path that ends up leading her down. Like I said, it's very dark. I did really enjoy it. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. And then finally, because this video was really long, I apologize. The last book that I read this week was A Midsummer's Nightmare by Cody Keplinger. Now, I read this. I only purchased this year, and I bumped this up my TBR because I thought this was going to achieve the prompt for my Around the Year in 52 Books challenge of reading a book by or inspired by Shakespeare, because I assumed from this title that this was a Midsummer Night's Dream retelling. I assumed that as well because like her last book that I read, Shut Out, is kind of a retelling. I can't remember what it's a retelling of off the top of my head, but it is a retelling. This is not a retelling as far as I could tell, so I have had to do some scrambling and figure out what I'm going to read instead because this just did not fulfill the prompt. Anyway, this is a YA contemporary. So it's basically about a girl named Whitley who at the start of the novel has basically woken up after a drunken one-night stand on like graduation night at a graduation party. So this basically is set over the course of the summer between high school and college, so kind of new adult. Basically she's had this sexual encounter with this guy. She is very much like a party girl and is not interested in having any kind of follow-on with this guy, and makes that very clear to him and leaves the next morning. And she then is going to spend the summer with her father. She lives with her mother and only sees her dad kind of in the summer each year. And she's going to spend the summer with her dad, but her dad breaks it to her that he has moved out of the house that he's normally lived in, and he's getting married, and the woman that he's getting married to has 2 children, one of whom, come to find out, is the guy that she had the one-night stand with, because of course. So that causes, of course, all kinds of complications. I have really enjoyed the last 2 Cody Keplinger books that I've read, both The Duff and Shut Out. I really enjoyed. Sorry, my leg is starting to fall asleep, so I'm just going to reposition myself. I've really enjoyed the last 2 books that I've read. This one really, I struggled with a lot more. The main character, Whitley, is incredibly unlikable. And yes, I feel like it was done intentionally to allow for this kind of growth of her character, which does happen. She does have some good character kind of development and growth, but it just wasn't enough for me. Like, I just found her really frustrating to read from. She's very much a huge party girl. Like I said, and that's not necessarily like something that makes me dislike a person, but she's very selfish, very self-centered. At one point, she takes the stepsister along to this party. The stepsister is 13. And she takes her along to this party, gives the sister alcohol, and then doesn't just give her alcohol, because like the sister wants it, says like, oh, can I have one? Like they're drinking shots of tequila. If that's the alcohol you're going to start off a 13-year-old with, which I just wouldn't anyway, but I certainly wouldn't be starting them off with shots of tequila. And then to the point where she's even saying to her, like, gives her the shot and then she's sipping on it. She's like, oh, that's not how you do it. You need to like slam the whole thing back. And I was like, Jesus Christ, she's 13. Not only that, gives her alcohol and then abandons her at the party. It's not, and she has every intention of abandoning her. She never has any intention of being brought down by this, you know. And I was just like, the huge irresponsible nature of that, I just found it really hard to get past. Also, the main character's parents are awful. And I feel like that was the main part of what this story was trying to get across, is, you know, dealing with, so her parents are divorced, and the mother, which I strongly disagree with, and it's kind of mentioned, like, you're not supposed to think that it is the right way to handle it, but I just really struggled with it. The main character's mother constantly badmouths the dad to the child, which I just have real problems with. I don't think that divorced parents should badmouth each other in front of the kids or to the kids directly. And then, but the daughter Whitley is just like, doesn't care about what the mum says and has this really close bond. But then the dad is a straight up, the dad doesn't tell her that he's getting married. And then he's like, and then his excuse for that is, oh, I didn't want to tell you over the phone or over email because that like seemed rude. I want to tell you in person. And I was like, that's ridiculous, but okay. Even if that was acceptable, you had this car journey with her for where you picked her up with the mother until you were driving to where you live, and you didn't tell her in the car. Literally, like, you know, it's that whole thing, and it's a trope that you see in like kind of teen movies, but it's just ridiculous, where she gets out of the car and then there's this woman and he's like, oh, this is my fiance, oh, and the fiance's got 2 kids, and oh, I moved, and oh, and I'm just like, what the friggin' heck. So the dad was awful, and then also the dad makes no effort whatsoever to have any kind of relationship with her over the summer. Clearly could not give two shits about her. And I feel like that was kind of trying to be addressed and like redeemed throughout the story, but just it was not enough for me. I know it sounds like I hated this book. My hair is sticking to my lip balm. That I hated this, and I didn't hate it. Like, and I know a lot of people in the reviews, the people that didn't like this, had a problem with the like step sibling kind of relationship. To me, that's not really an issue. I have more of an issue with that type of thing if the characters grew up together, because then to me it gets a bit icky. But these are just, I mean, yes, their parents are going to be getting married, but they don't know each other. They're not related. They didn't grow up together. There's nothing that makes them any more connected than just two people that would meet in any other circumstances. So I don't really have a problem with it. I didn't hate this book. Like, it was enjoyable for the most part, but I did struggle with this one a lot more than I have with her previous books. And in the end, I gave this 3 stars. Whew. So that's everything I read. Just very, very quickly to touch on what I'm currently reading, because I recognize that this video is super long and I apologize. I am currently reading 10,000 Skies Above You by Claudia Gray. This is the second book in the Firebird trilogy, which is a YA sci-fi trilogy, basically about a girl who can travel between dimensions. I'm not going to get into it too much because you'll hear about it next week when I finished it. I only just started this today. I'm about 57 pages in at the moment, so I will definitely finish this weekend, but that is what I'm currently reading. Whew. So that's it. That is everything I read. That is what I'm currently reading. I would love to chat with you guys in the comments down below if you've got any thoughts on any of the books that I've been reading, if you've read them, what your feelings on them were, or just if you want to talk about what you've been reading recently. I would love to chat about that as well. Please like this video if you liked it. Please subscribe if you want to see more from my channel. That is all I have for this video today. Bye guys.